Hello and welcome to another episode of my ability system series. In the last one we created a little selection system so we can select enemies, they are highlighted and we see their HP, level, name. And today we are going to use that system to create some new spells. In particular we are going to create magic missile effects that are really common in those MMORPG titles. So you just select an enemy, hit your spell and it will launch a missile that will automatically hit the enemy. But before we can get started to work on our blueprints, we need some particle effects because we're going to create an arcane ball. Because I'm not an artist, I'll just head over to the starter content and duplicate some particles here, make some slight adjustments. Let's start by grabbing our fire, duplicate that, call it p_arcane ball, open it up, and we don't need all of those emitters here, so remove everything except for the first flames. And also in here we don't need all of that stuff, so constant acceleration, we don't need that, as well as the dynamic. Size by life can go away, and the initial velocity. Then let's go to the required tab and select use local space. That way later we won't see a trail behind our particle system when we move it. Head over to the spawn, expand the rate, distribution, and we'll bump that up to, let's say, 30. Got a lot more flames here. Let's also go to the lifetime and make that a bit shorter, so minimum of 0.5 maybe. Let's give it some more dynamic here. Then we will go to the sphere and we need to make it a lot more dense. So let's grab the constant here, set it to 5. Now you can see slowly our ball here is coming together. Let's also make that larger in general, so initial size, and let's say max will be 80, 110 Y, and for the minimum 60 and 90. Last thing we need to do here is modify our color, so let's go to color over life, expand the color over life, distribution, constant curve, points, 0. So we got our out value here, that's the color when our particle system starts, and I will set that to 1.3 for red, 1.6 for green, and 20 for blue. It's getting that kind of arcane color, but you see it's not really blue because the second point in our timeline is still red, so it's merging blue and red. So expand the out value there, and here we'll make it slightly darker shade of blue. So we can go for 0 for red, 6 for green, and 7 for blue. And now you see we got a nice little arcane ball effect. The other thing we need to do here is when we go to a higher lot 1, you will see that our particle system is not looking correct. And that's because the spawn module is modified there. So when we go back, we see the constant set to 2.5. Just reset that to 30 and it will look okay again. Save it and close our arcane ball. So we've got that working. Now we need an impact effect when the ball hits our enemy, and we can grab the explosion for that. So just hit Ctrl W to duplicate it and call it p_arcane burst and open that up. Also we don't need all of those emitters here, so I will remove the sparks, the firelight, and the smoke. So we only got the fireball and shockwave left. And I want to make that effect a little bit faster. One way to do that is go to the lifetime of the shockwave and decrease that, maybe 0.2 for the shockwave. And let's go to the fireball lifetime, set it to 0.2 to 0.4. And now our effect is a little bit faster. The only thing we still need to modify is the color. So what we can do is let's do a shockwave first, go to color over life, it's already expanded. 0.0, we will again modify the out value for that to, let's say, 1.1, 1.5, and 20. So that's blue again. Then let's scroll down and go to the second point. And here we will set the out value to 0. Then for green, say 1.5 and 2 for blue. And another thing we need to do is modify our leaf tangent. Just set that to 0, 0, and 4 for blue. Alright, now we need to do exactly the same thing for our fireball. So let's go to color over live, go to the first point, and I will set to 0, 0.1, and 1. And for the second point, we are going to use 0, 0, and 0.5. Alright, now that's looking like an Arcane Impact, sort of. So let's save those, and we will expand our skill system, blueprints, skill actors, and grab our 2 effects that we just created, move them into the effects. And now we can get started. Let's go into our master enemy first. We will head over to the viewport and just add an arrow component. Call that hit arrow. So every time you launch a projectile, it will ask for a component that it should hit, and we will use that arrow to drive that, so that later when we create child classes, select maybe a slightly larger mesh, we can just move that hit arrow so our projectile will still be able to follow the enemy. You can scale down the arrow size, we don't really want to see it, 0.1, and just move it up by 20 in Z. That's everything we had to do for our master enemy, so save and close it. Now we can go to our skill actors, and off of our master skill, create child blueprint, which we will call skill underscore missile. We will keep that empty for now, but just have it created. And then go to our blueprints folder, right click, new blueprint class, the type actor called BP underscore magic projectile. So this will be the actor that will spawn to hit the enemy. Open that up. And we need to add some components. So we will start with a sphere collision, just for the hit detection. And radius, I will bump that up to 55. We will see later when we add our particle system if that's fitting. Also, we don't want to have gravity, so disable gravity. Collision presets will be block all dynamic. We want to simulate hit events. And then we will add a component, a particle system. And let's just give it a default emitter, which will be our Arcane Ball. If we add that here and check our sphere, yeah, that should be good enough. And one thing to get it moving is to add a projectile movement component. Set the initial speed to 3000, though that will be controlled by our skill. Rotation should follow velocity. We don't want to have gravity, so 0. Bounciness can be 0. I will slightly modify the friction to 0.3. Just found out that that was working good when I was experimenting with it. Velocity will be 0 in all dimensions. And to make a projectile always hit a certain component, you need to check is homing projectile and give it an acceleration magnitude. This will be capped by the max speed, which it also says in the tooltip here. But we don't really know what our max speed is, because that's controlled in the skill, like I said. So you can just give it an incredibly high value. And we should be good to go. Let's go to our sphere and add an on-component hit event. But we'll implement that later. So first off, we need some variables in here. We need a target, which will be a master enemy, specifically the one we just selected. It's a reference, editable, and exposed on spawn. Then we need the skill that was used to spawn this projectile, and that will be a missile, skill missile reference, also editable and exposed on spawn. We also need a missile effect. That will be a particle system reference, and also editable and exposed on spawn. And finally we need another effect, which is the impact effect. Also particle system, editable, exposed on spawn. Right. So on event begin play, we need to tell our projectile about its speed and what it should hit. So let's do that. Get our skill, get current stage, break it, and we only want to see the missile speed. Drag in our projectile movement and set initial speed as well as set max speed. If you want your projectile to accelerate, you could set the initial speed maybe to half of the max speed if you want to, but we're not going to do that. We will set both to the missile speed. Then let's get our particle system and set template. Then it's asking for a new template, and that will be our missile effect. And after that we can get our projectile movement, and the node that you need to use so that it's supposed to hit a certain enemy is set homing target component. And that's exactly the reason why we had to create our hit arrow, because it's waiting for a scene component to be fed in. So let's get our target. See, we cannot connect that. We need to get the hit arrow and plug that in here. Alright. Then go to our on-sphere hit. And first off, we need to check that the other actor equals the target that we're supposed to hit. Add a branch. If that's the case, we first want to spawn an emitter at location. And the emitter is our impact effect. Location, we can just use the current location of the projectile. After that, let's get our target and call onReceiveDamage. Then let's copy over our current stage of the spell. And here we want to see the damage type, the damage and crit chance. Plug those in, base damage, type, crit chance. The spell will just be our skill. Attacker is the player reference of a spell. And the element will come from our skill, so just get the info, break that, uncheck everything except for element, and plug that in. Right, so we dealt damage and we spawned the emitter. The only thing left is destroying ourselves. And that's it for our projectile. Close it. Before we go into our missile spell, let's just very quickly open up the skill player controller. And here we need a missile spell. We won't use that in this episode, but in the next one we need to make it so that when you are walking towards an enemy to launch a missile spell and then you click somewhere else, that movement command has to be cancelled, and then we don't want to try to cast the missile spell. That will just be a missile skill missile reference. Compile and save. Now we can go to our skill actors, open up the skill missile, and let's also open up the master skill because we need to override some functions. So first off, in our event graph we got our onTryCast spell event. Let's copy all of that and paste it in our skill missile. Then you need to remove the custom event and search for onTryCast spell. Use the event. So we want to check for all of the conditions that the parent class does, but also we want to check that the selected enemy of the player is valid. So that just means have we selected an enemy. If not, we cannot cast a missile spell, which makes sense. Then let's copy our initialize spell cast. All of that, what happens here. We will copy that, paste it, and add another custom event that we will call mana check. Because when we try to initialize the spell, we need to check whether we are in range and if we have enough mana. So that will be a separate custom event. Then search for onInitialize spellcast and use the event. Before we do that though, let's add a function here called inAttackRange. Make that a pure function with one output, boolean, just call it out. And what we need to do here is get the player reference, get distance to, the other actor being the selected enemy, and we need to compare that to our current stage, because if we break that, there is a variable called range. So we need to check whether the distance to our selected enemy is less than or equal to our range, and just plug that in for the out. So when we initialize the spell cast, let's check whether we are in attack range. Add a branch. If we are in attack range, we can perform a mana check. And our mana check will handle casting a spell if we have enough mana. But if we're not in attack range, we need to set timer by function name, because now we want to move towards the enemy and constantly check, are we now in attack range? And if so, perform mana check. Object will be self. Function name will be distance check. We will create that function in a second. It will be looping and an interval of 0.2. Promote that to a variable, which we will call distance timer. Get our player reference. Get player con reference. And set missile spell to ourselves, because now we got a missile spell that is supposed to be casted but wasn't because we're not in range. Let's also add a custom event called stop timer. So this function here will be called if we stop selecting an enemy or if we cancel our movement command with WASD or clicking somewhere else. So we will just get the distance timer, clear and invalidate that, and then copy over our player conref and the set missile spell, because we will then just set it to null, clearing it basically. Alright, compile and save. Now let's create a function called distance check. Make sure that you spell that exactly like in the timer, so you can just copy that name over so you don't make a mistake. And in here we will get our player, get our selected enemy, and let's see if that is valid, because if not, we can stop trying to cast that spell. So just stop timer. But if it is valid, let's get our in attack range and add another branch. If we are in attack range now, we can perform mana check. But before that, we need to stop the timer. And if we are not in attack range, let's just get our player reference, player conref, and call simple move to actor, the goal being the selected enemy. So every 0.2 seconds we will check, do we still have a selected enemy? If not, we'll actually stop the timer, and if the branch is false, we will simple move to. So if not, we will stop the timer and no longer try to cast that spell. If we still have one, we check, are we now in attack range? If so, we stop the timer, check for mana, if we have some, cast the spell. But if not, we will try to get close to the enemy, and in the next 0.2 seconds we will then again see, are we in range of our enemy? If so, cast a spell. There are some other events that we have to override here. So one is event on spell cast, and we need to rotate our actor towards the selected enemy. So get the player reference, get the selected enemy, off of the player, set actor rotation, and then just off of the selected enemy, get actor location, copy that for the player, and then off of the player, find look at rotation. Target being our selected enemy, plug that in for the new rotation, and after we rotated it, we can add a call to parent function and execute the rest of the functionality. Last thing that we need to do here is our on skill notify event. What we want to do there is spawn actor from class, the class being magic projectile, split the spawn transform. We want to spawn it close to a player, so get the player and its actor location, and we will add a little offset there. I figured out that AT and Z works fine, plug that in for the location. The target will be the selected enemy of a player. Skill will be ourselves. Missile effect, let's promote that to a variable called missile effect. So we can set that in our child classes. And do the same thing for impact effect. Compile and save that. And basically that's everything we had to do for our skill missile. Just save it, close it, and right click our skill missile. We want to create a child blueprint to test it. Let's call that skill underscore Arcane Ball. Double click. Go to the class defaults. So missile effect will be Arcane Ball. The impact will be Arcane Burst. Skill animation, I'll just use attack 01 because we set up a skill notify for that already. Then expand the skill info. Name will be Arcane Ball. The icon will be icon underscore Arcane Ball. The element will be arcane, obviously. Target is a selected enemy. And by the way, you should set that in the parent class, because every missile will only use selected enemies. So let's do that really quickly. Skill missile, class defaults, and the target will be selected enemy. Then we need to add our stages. We'll just add one. We don't need an override icon. Range, we'll set that to 1500. Damage maybe to 90. Damage type just absolute, so we can test that when we got damage numbers and so on. Critical chance 10%, cooldown of 5 seconds. Casting time 2 seconds. Missile speed I will set that to 3000. Mana cost of 50, and rest here won't be needed. Maybe you remember that every time we want to test a new spell, go to the third person character or skill character, and starting skills will add one element to that, which will be the Arcane Ball. Now let's compile and save this. Be ready to play test. So you see our new spell. Move it around. If we just try to cast it, nothing happens. But if we select our enemy and move close to it, I can hit F8 to cast the spell, and you saw it was really quick. You can modify the initial speed if we want to. And if we select our enemy, then hit F8, we will move towards it, and if we are in range, cast a spell. The other thing we can do is select an enemy, and if we cast a spell, but then select something else, it will be cancelled. Right, so that's working properly. That's it for this episode. In the next one we'll make it so that you can cancel the bell command when you move, and maybe start working on some skill tooltips. So see you in the next episode.